$30 billion AUKUS infrastructure announcement will set up work for generation after generation of young South Australians. 300 university scholarships going to low SES kids so that they have the opportunity to build submarines too.
SMEs, even the larger ones, their primary financial driver is cash flow. But one of the biggest issues in defence industry has been the stop-start nature of government policy, which leads to projects being stopped. The government said it many times just before they cancel a project that we're in the most contested and congested geopolitical situation since the Second World War.
That in aggregate presents a challenge to government to tell a plausible, credible, honest story about why the nation needs to invest in defence capability for the future. This isn't only about AUKUS, for example, which is really prominent in the debate, but it's about the whole spectrum of defence capability and defence spending.
It's very hard to get finance in the defence industry. Now, there's been a lot of work on that, but you basically need a contract to do it. One of the biggest issues for SMEs is clarity of the customer, because it was only one customer, right? But it is a multi-headed one.
When it comes to the question of trust in national security, there are lots of dimensions to unpack. So our community consultations found relatively low levels of trust in government messaging, especially when that government messaging is coming from political voices, from ministers and parliamentarians. There was in fact an appetite for more messaging from government about the risks and the threats the nation faces. And in our qualitative consultations, focus groups and interviews, people said they want to hear those messages from credible sources like security agencies, not necessarily from politicians. I don't think it's fair to say that the community has low levels of trust in the Defence Force. I think the levels of confidence are a different question, because there's a very open conversation about whether Australia has sufficient defence capability for its needs. And I think the public has a broad understanding that not everything Australia needs to do for its defence it can do single-handedly.
SMEs have a more compressed cycle because they're hunting for people. You need them quickly. You can grab a few before you get the contract, but once you have a contract, you need to get those people quickly. Now, what the government is doing at the moment, both federal and state, where they're going to train like 1,000 people a year, is really good, and it's great for the defence industry, because you can't switch these big projects on and off. They take a long time. There is only a small subset of countries where you can gain skilled labour that are going to work in, let's just call them classified projects. So anything AUKUS, electronic warfare sensors. Unfortunately, unless you're an Australian citizen, you can't get a security clearance unless you're come from a Five Eyes country where clearances can be arranged more quickly.
Plainly, there are connections between population, workforce, immigration when it comes to ensuring Australia has the whole of nation security capability for all these future challenges. At one level, in our community consultations, we encountered what is plain to see in the media, in the political debate. There's great division within Australian society in thinking about immigration, political division. So immigration is obviously controversial in the Australian political debate, and therefore it's going to be controversial to link immigration to national security. But we have to be really upfront about the reality that Australia needs human capital, Australia needs people, it needs people with skills, and it needs people who can combine the skills with commitment and frankly loyalty to the national interest, loyalty to Australia.
This is where an election cycle every 3 years, right, and there's a chance you change government. Even if you keep the same government, portfolios change, there's a different emphasis, something's happened where funding is needed there, oh, we'll cut that. If you change things like that, the ramifications, they're huge.
Actually, national security and international strategy, they all start at home. So a lot of my colleagues in the security community may not know that I actually began my career as a small town journalist. So I began working very much on local government issues. The public wants to know more from government. There is an information gap between government and the community on security and resilience issues. I think a big start would be a much more open national conversation initiated by government, initiated frankly at a prime ministerial level, to talk frankly with the community about the risks that we face in the world and the realisation that government alone cannot protect the country from these risks. We need to do this together.
Now, if you buy something from overseas, you can't change it without the nation that owns it agreeing to it. Unless you own things, you can't change things. So that's sovereignty, right? The other thing about being a sovereign capability is that it creates industrial smarts in our country. There was a report released in December 23 by AIDEN and the Sovereign Australian Prime Association, and one of the recommendations in that report was to quarantine $500 million a year, moving to $1 billion in defence contracts specifically for SMEs. They're still competing. It's not this money's for this company. You've got to have a good idea and you've got to demonstrate that you're able to realise that idea.
In the medium to long term, migration will continue to be important for building the pool of talent that Australia needs for its national security. But it's not going to be enough on its own. We need to find ways to ensure that migrant communities, as well as Australian-born communities, are motivated to work in the national interest, motivated to work out of commitment and loyalty to an inclusive Australian identity, to Australian values. A more sophisticated way of engaging migrant communities, first, second generation migrant communities in Australia in support of the national interest, is through a much more open, textured conversation with them between government and the community, regularly looking at what is it we as a community seek to protect. Safe and peaceful communities, freedom of expression, freedom to make political choices, and conveying a clearer understanding that this cannot be done purely by the Commonwealth Government. We need all Australians to be part of this effort. We have a National Cabinet. We almost never hear that National Cabinet is talking about national resilience or national security, but this should be a permanent standing agenda item. Education, skills, workforce are absolutely national security issues. And so there has been a disconnect in the past, I think, between the national education and indeed the nation-building agenda and the security agenda. I don't mind if these things are not called security. We can call them something else. It's about resilience or the sustainability, the continuity of the Australian way of life.